Let's talk about that for a second. So when I look at the VC landscape in Israel, first of all, yes, why invest in Israel? If you look at metrics like VC per capita, Israel is the highest in the world, almost twice or 3 times as high as the US, which is pretty much the country who invented this business. But when I look at the VCs in Israel, whether they're Israelis or American VCs, it's almost solely US money. So what do Americans see here that the Europeans don't see, or for the sake of the discussion, even the Europeans don't see, or the Israelis don't see? The Israeli institutional investors, this is a known secret, do not invest for some reason in the high-tech sector and in this VC opportunity. So what is it that the Americans see that others don't?
Well, a word of caution. Yeah, so well over 90% of the money that's invested here in the venture market comes from U.S. investors, whether it's an Israeli-based fund or a U.S.-based fund. So that's true. But we have to appreciate the size of the commitment. There's a caution here, right? That it's on the amount of capital compared to what is invested in America, tiny. Still very, very small. So with that caution, we should talk about it, but we shouldn't think that America's got this, has opened up the doors and the flood of capital in ways that are commensurate with where I think the opportunity is. I actually think that there is a shortage of capital in the market today to actually go in and take advantage of not only institutional investing, but much earlier stage. So why do they pick here? Well, so you can read the book, right, and discuss
Startup Nation.
Right, you can read the book and go through the list of those. What are those pieces that actually provide an opportunity here versus anywhere else?
How many people read the book here in the audience? Only a third. You want to tell the other 2/3 the highlights?
I'd love to. It's a discussion of what makes Israel unique in the international world for innovation. Why is it number 2? Why does it have all these metrics that put it in a place much different than any other country in the world? And a lot of it has to do with the immigrant society. A lot of it has to do with the citizen army and the dynamics that are placed when you actually all have to go into service, and the responsibilities that you take on as you go through the military service. The size, some of the existential passion that goes into this. There's a whole series of elements to it. In my mind, the most important reason and why it's felt that there's an opportunity here is, as I would put about in the existential dynamic. If you take the work of cyber, or you take the work of mobility, there's plenty of companies in America and plenty of companies in the world who are involved in the effort of cyber. Plenty. There's a difference here. And the difference is the people who has the expertise, who have been trained in that area, are being trained in it for the safety and security of Israel. There's a bigger responsibility, and that responsibility starts when you're 18 and 19 and 20, and you have to deliver at that level when an 18-year-old in America is not may have some interest in this and may be focused on it, but it's not for the good of the country. There's a much different dynamic here. So the passion that gets driven out of the entrepreneurial, out of the existential need, provides for better opportunities here. The last piece of this is the reason why I think that at least why we're focusing, Amiti is focusing here and focusing in a more significant way, is the areas that Israel actually is best in class.
What are those?
If you take cyber, big data, mobility, semiconductors. Those are the areas that actually have been churning success and innovation over all these years, primarily coming out of the military experience. Those areas, those industries, have now intersected with global demand. Israel's on the front line of so many of these needs. It's now being expressed with global responsibility. The global need for cyber, the global need for big data, the global need for mobility is at a peak and not stopping. And this is an area where Israel is actually best in class, better in innovation than what's happening in Silicon Valley. That doesn't mean there isn't more capital flowing there, but there are better ideas flowing out of here.
Okay, let's continue with that comparison. What are the similarities or differences between what you see here in the Tel Aviv scene and the Silicon Valley scene? Cultural differences, any difference?
Well, the biggest is size. I mean, and then break down the size dynamic. 30 years ago, when HP was just beginning its run, or 35 years ago when HP was beginning its run in Silicon Valley, you can almost, even though America, obviously its geography is much different, you can almost in the Silicon Valley arena tie that similar to what is happening here at that time. In other words, they didn't have a lot of venture capital there. There was a few rich individuals. There were no venture funds at that time, but there were seed people, Arthur Rock and a number of other ones started to build some of these companies and put money in at that time. You can parallel that to what is happening here. So the biggest difference, if you look at it today, compared, is just enormous timeline changes. The maturity of what's happening in Silicon Valley is 30 years ahead of where we are here in Israel, by far. And then obviously you have the timeline that where there's Cisco's and Oracle's and Google's, and you can go down the list that run down Silicon Valley that are mature companies looking to acquire companies. You're starting to see that here. To me, that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, and just to give context on that, Apple entered into Israel. I think it's the first R&D they opened outside of the US just 2 years ago through acquisition. And we just heard today in the news that Facebook acquired a company which will probably leave here. So it's going to be
they made the statement they're going to live here, right? They made the statement that office will stay here, right?
Yeah, that's what the newspaper said. Yeah. Yeah, which you need to take with cautious. Okay, great. I want to sum up, and I'd like to zoom out again to the big picture. And looking at all the turbulence in this region, in our neighborhood, do you think this Israel-U.S. relationship will stay strong, or is it at risk, challenged?
Well, I always use the analogy in the States that every day in Israel is like the seventh game of the World Series, right? You think you've dealt with the most critical moment on that Wednesday, and then you wake up Thursday, and it's a whole nother set of a set of crises that have to deal with the state of Israel and its safety and security. So every day presents this question. I would say that I think over a very long, if you look at the long arc, that the United States and Israel will stay friends for a very significant period of time, and the primary reason is they're supposed to. I mean, we're right in the argument. The argument that it's in America's interest to stay close to Israel is the right argument, right? You can criticize it and you can say, well, they're not doing this, or they should be more engaged here, and so forth. But at the end of the day, there's no better friend in the entire world than the state of Israel. You flip, and so where does the state of Israel go for its friends? Can it survive on its own? Well, I suppose it can survive in its own sandbox. But as you move out geopolitically, it's going to continue to need the friendship that the United States provides for it. So I don't see that changing. The challenge is that it's a new day every day with those that need to be educated. Right? So last cycle, 25% of the House changed hands. So there's 435 members of the House and a little over 100 new members of the House. So you do that in a few cycles, and you have an entire new House after 8 to 10 years. And you think that people who, just as an anecdote, there were about 100 new members last year. 80 of them, of those 100, didn't have passports when they became a member of Congress. Okay, so
80% didn't have passports.
Right, didn't have a passport. So
Israel is the first.
Thank goodness for the work of AIPAC. So close to the same number of those 100 went to Israel on their first trip out of the country this past summer to see what Israel is all about. But to us, look, we barely can remember what happened, the cast lead or You can keep going back, let alone 73, let alone 48, let alone the history of the state of Israel and so forth. These people start fresh. They have no idea. So you have to continually make that effort to educate. So if we do our work, then I think everything will be good, because the bottom line is we're right in the argument.
Great. So we wish you best of luck on your work, and that you continue to do that great work. It was a pleasure to have you, Rosie. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks, man.